It's just over a year since the publication of the excellent Tracy Crouch report. I've been asked by a lot of people as to what my views are on the fan-led review, or whether an independent regulator is needed, and if so, what would the role entail? A year on and nothing achieved, an all too familiar situation where we see, in Tracy's own words, a minority of self-interested voices continue to block meaningful reform. So this is my view based on my careers as a professional footballer over 17 years with professional clubs, and part of which I was the PFA representative, chief exec of the FA, and a 30-year career working with businesses with financial problems, and also as the owner and executive chairman of a lower league professional football club for the last 8 years. This is intended as a critique of the governance of our national game, not a criticism of the individuals who happen to be or have been in post in a system that militates against modern governance. Governance means different things to different people, and for me, it's all about stakeholders having confidence in the decision-making processes and that their particular views are properly taken into account in a way that balances their interests for the greater good of the organisation, the collective, the industry, etc. If anything, it's directed towards Stuart Andrew, the sports minister, on whose watch the best chance to protect the national sport will either be taken or left to flounder once again on the tried and trusted modus operandi of football's powers that be, delay and walk difficult issues into the long grass. In a nutshell, Tracy Crouch's review was an excellent piece of work, but should be just seen for just for what it is, and that is the first step in a process that's seeking to fix a problem that's been in the making for the last 70 years, and which the game's Victorian governance structures have patently failed to address, allowing the inexorable march of Mammon, with the rich getting richer and financial doping killing competition, something which is fatal to a sport. The worry now is that the required political support will fall prey to the usual modus operandi of the game's constituent organisations, the vested interests that seek to delay and walk the problem into the long grass, outlasting the politicians' short-term attention span, which in turn is driven by the politically expedient, populist issue of the day, most recently the attempts to form the closed shop of the Super League. But other elements of the game are also complicit, selling the long term for the short term, as the EPL bankrolls football in this country. The combination of EPL money and the constant sword of Damocles of a breakaway of and championship clubs from the EFL has resulted in the EFL's voting structure becoming increasingly sclerotic. The EFL voting arrangements are such that the championships clubs have a blocking vote on anything meaningful. This essentially means that the championship clubs call the shots, resulting in other League One and League Two owners realising their impotence to materially change things, and they disengage. And as a result, ironically today, the Premier League and the EFL are meeting to discuss the price to be paid for dumbing down the excitement of the cup competitions for lower league fans. The first question to be answered is whether or not we should try to support the pyramid, despite the comments attributed to a well-known chairman of one of the Big Five at the time of the debate on sharing the increasingly material TV monies, the Heathrow Agreement in 1985. The comment was that lower league clubs needed to be, and I quote, put to sleep. I think that it is accepted, however, that the pyramid, which is unique and inextricably woven into the fabric of so many local communities in this country, should be supported. The collective response to the suggested formation of the Super League, as well as the increasing attendances at EFL matches and the National League, which of this season has been pulling in crowds and 10,000 plus in some cases. This indicates that a lot of people in this country think that the pyramid is something that's worth the effort. It's also recognised that things can't continue as they are, and Tracy Crouch's work recommends the appointment of an independent regulator, which again has been generally accepted, although, importantly, the detail of the role has not been determined and is in danger of being watered down. Disturbingly, a year has gone with no tangible progress, more worryingly, if you accept my earlier characterisation of the game's modus operandi, it's been reported that the government is looking to the game to provide a solution to the question of funds flow with a fallback. The regulator can intervene if the response is deemed inadequate. But can the game fix itself? This is the second question. I have to say that I thought this question had already been conclusively answered by experience. How many examples do you need? Earlier, I referred to the inexorable march of melon over the last 70 years. In 1955, the start of European competition saw the start of the FA becoming nothing more than a local regulator, with English teams now operating outside of its jurisdiction. The FA's influence and relationships with UEFA and FIFA, whilst increasingly important as the game has grown globally, have in fact waned. Champions League money now has an increasing impact on the domestic football scene. In 1961, the abolition of the maximum wage became the death knell of towns versus cities in terms of competition. Since 1962, only 3 or 4 towns have actually hosted the club that's won the top league, as the impact of the larger gate income attributed to the city-based clubs starts to have an impact. Then in 1983, probably the year when it really started to go pear-shaped, gate sharing ceased and the big clubs got richer. But perhaps more importantly, the FA's Regulation 34, which used to prevent directors of football clubs deriving their main income from their ownership of a football club, and stated that dividends paid on shares in clubs would not be more than 5% of the face value. All of this got circumvented when Spurs were allowed to form a holding company and avoid this restriction. The purpose of Regulation 34 was to recognise and ensure that the local professional football club was and remained a community asset. Sound familiar? No stroke offered by the FA. Sound familiar? In 1985, the infamous Heathrow Agreement, as the big clubs forced the issue on a greater share of the TV monies, which had increasingly become more important than gate monies, was followed in 1992. The constant threat of a breakaway from the Football League became a reality with the formation of the FA Premier League. This was the FA's big chance, but it has sat in the corner ever since, whilst keeping a tight hold on its somewhat tarnished and unused golden share. In 1995, the Bosman ruling threw petrol on the flames of the wages bonfire. In 2005, remember the Burns report? I'm not surprised that you don't. The delay in responding to that and what happened as a consequence affected results. Sound familiar? I was a member of the committee of the EFL Governance Review in 2019. We tried to bring the EFL governance kicking and screaming into making nothing more than late 20th century governance by recommending a truly independent board without club representatives. This essential change was thrown out, which brings me to something more recent. The game's collective and shambolic response to COVID, a classic example of the failure of the collective when faced with the sea of self-interest by the so-called representatives of the game stakeholders. Ironically, whilst the organisations which claim to represent the various stakeholders and the game's best interests, while they floundered, in stark contrast, the individual component clubs, their fans and players, had a good pandemic, with their clubs and their fans like Tranmere and individual players like Rashford acting as a focal point of their community and helping those most affected by the pandemic. So in answer to the question the government seems to have difficulty with, can the game fix itself? The answer has to be no, no, and no. And if you think otherwise, either you're a free market zealot, currently not in vogue in government circles, or you have a vested interest, and we know what Tracy Crouch thinks of that. And finally, you may actually read Hans Christian Andersen at night before you go to sleep. So back to what should the independent regulator do? Despite the fact that the majority of people think we should protect the pyramid, it should be recognised that with the benefit comes the burden. There are structural problems that have to be recognised, and the role of the independent regulator needs to be seen in that context. One of the fundamental problems is the fact that whether it's the FA or the regulator, we only have a local jurisdiction. Whilst our top clubs play in a global market, the spending power for a few stems from access to global markets, selling shirts worldwide, and creating a global fan base. One of the attractions of our pyramid is that it's linked through promotion and relegation. Ambition is the lifeblood of the game, and that's what the clubs thrive on and the fans thrive. However, the lightly regulated wages market allows the global money that few can access to be spent in a linked wages market, creating unfettered wage inflation throughout the pyramid and creating a hand-to-mouth existence for professional football clubs. This militates against clubs building their reserves for a rainy day. The gaps in the pyramid, after years of parachute payments, as well as loose controls over owners, etc., creates a lethal cocktail of reckless gambling, evidence of which is reflected everywhere across the pyramid, seen in the club's day-to-day financial difficulties. Whilst many detailed and sensible suggestions have been made, for example, Fair Games Sustainability Index, at this stage, for me, the role has to be looked at strategically, recognising that the main aim of the independent regulator should be to provide a context that allows individual clubs to build their financial reserves. And importantly, to recognise that this can only be done over a number of years. But to do this requires regulation that puts a stop to the hand-to-mouth existence, which is principally driven by the relatively unregulated wages market. There are many other aspects that would assist and are well rehearsed elsewhere. For example, control over owners and directors needs completely reforming. Education in this area wouldn't go on this either. But creating a more sensible wages market that is more aligned to affordability is the main issue that needs urgent attention, alongside increased distribution down the pyramid, for which there is scope without destroying the competitiveness that makes the Premier League the best in the world. Increased distribution so as to reduce the gaps between divisions and leagues, an essential part of which is also dealing with the insidious impact of parachute payments. Actually, and some would say purposefully, these increase the gaps. To increase distribution without controls would be like stamping water out of a puddle. Before you know it, you'll be back to square one. Sadly, because it is full of good people, the FA can't convince me that they could do what is necessary to protect the pyramid. The organisation has too far to go, too many changes to make to get yet another chance. Fundamentally, it fails to stand up to the Premier League. As I have said, because any regulator will only have a local jurisdiction, our game has global players, there is a very important role for the FA in providing the English game with a strong voice in UEFA and FIFA, something that admittedly has a long way to go to achieve this, but is important as the global game will increasingly face big challenges with the growing battlegrounds of streaming and global club competitions. There are the other more traditional areas that the FA should retain: on-field discipline, grassroots provision, etc. For me, the league should stick to managing and commercialising the competitions, which they do very well. They should not pretend to represent the club owners. During the pandemic, the EFL recognised that it couldn't effectively marshal the collective. I know that due to the voting system that's evolved in the EFL, with the championship calls the shots, the organisation does not effectively represent my club, which is why we've joined Fair Game. The pyramid now consists of different animals, and each constituency deserves proper representation when it comes to the game's decision-making. Owners are expected to provide considerable financial support and deserve more appropriate representation, as much as fans deserve a better, more influential voice in the governance of the game. In my view, as an ex-player and former PFA rep, the players are more than adequately represented at this stage, as was demonstrated during the pandemic. Ultimately, I believe that it's a privilege to be part of the game in this country, whether it is a player, administrator, or owner, the latter being a custodian of a piece of local heritage, the local professional football club. The local professional football clubs that together contribute as an integral part of the social fabric of many communities. In the final analysis, the fans are these clubs. The game's poor governance have meant we have had to rely on insolvency processes, administrations, to show us this basic truth, and clubs have painfully regenerated themselves following administration, in spite of the governance rather than because of it. The opportunity is now to fix it. In summary, should we protect the pyramid? Yes. Can the game do it itself? No. Do we need an independent regulator? Yes. The aims of the regulator should be to, over time, improve the financial strength of the individual clubs that constitute the pyramid and enable competition to be regenerated season after season by developing an environment that removes the long-standing hand-to-mouth existence, by reducing the gaps in the pyramid, starting with increased distributions, reducing the impact of parachute payments and greater wage controls, but also by providing a trusted mechanism or forum for all stakeholders, including fans, to present their issues, see them given a fair hearing, and more importantly, see appropriate action. To do this, Stuart Andrew needs to recognise the industry's modus operandi, to face down the noise and give the independent regulator a proper mandate and the requisite powers and resourcing to protect the pyramid. A failure to do so will squander the best opportunity I've seen in all my time in the game.